You're watching Live Now from Fox. Welcome back. We do want to take you out to this live look here of Capitol Hill. U.S. Congress is about to launch a war powers debate over President Trump's authority to bomb Iran under largely unusual circumstances. He's already done it, and the country is essentially already at war. At least 4 U.S. military personnel have been killed, and President Trump warned on Sunday there will likely be more. The moment is a defining one for Congress, which alone has the authority under the U.S. Constitution to declare war. In the U.S., the Congress would need to affirmatively approve wartime operations with a declaration of war or with an authorization for the use of military force to essentially approve of the actions, but this rarely happens. In fact, Congress has declared war just 5 times in the nation's history, most recently back in 1941 to enter World War II, a day after the Pearl Harbor attack. But Congress also created the War Powers Resolution during the Vietnam War era as something of a tool of a last resort. Both the House and Senate have prepared War Powers resolutions for votes this week. White House officials are scheduled to brief congressional leaders and lawmakers this week, but the question and answer sessions will be behind closed doors. To break down more of this for us here is our very own Ryan Schmelz, as he is joining us here live. Thank you so much, Ryan. We do appreciate you taking the time.
Great to be on, Christy. How are you?
I'm great. All right. Well, let's start with what I just said here. White House officials scheduled to brief congressional leaders and lawmakers this week, but the question and answer sessions will be behind closed doors. You have covered Capitol Hill for a very long time there. So what can we expect in those briefings?
Well, normally, and what we're expecting specifically with this one is for Secretaries Rubio, Hegseth, Ratcliffe, as well as General Kane to brief these lawmakers behind closed doors, both in the House as well in the Senate, in what's called a SCIF, which is a classified room where classified information gets shared usually with lawmakers. This one will involve every single member of Congress that'll be allowed to go in there and ask questions of the administration. Now, these briefings are not rare. They happen after the strikes in Venezuela. There's also been other strikes that the administration has gone forward with that have involved a SCIF briefing with members of Congress. Usually they are not legally allowed to talk about what happens inside the SCIF, but there usually is a question and answer portion that lawmakers will take from the press afterwards, maybe not getting into the specific details, but it can change how they might vote on a piece of legislation, like if there's going to be the War Powers Resolution vote this week in both chambers. The information they learn in the SCIF could determine how they vote on that.
Well, lawmakers are preparing war powers resolutions this week, as we've been saying here. But realistically, Ryan, do these resolutions have the power to restrain the president, especially if a veto override would require a 2/3 majority? Can you break that down for our viewers?
I think most people will view this as a symbolic vote because, just like you mentioned, President Trump would likely veto any war powers resolution that gets sent to his desk. Now, it could be a symbolic vote if this is able to pass both chambers. And the reason why it could be symbolic is that you would have to have Republicans cross the political aisle in order for this to get passed, whether it's in the House and the Senate. A couple senators to watch for would be Lisa Murkowski as well as Susan Collins, Republican senators who have been critical of the Trump administration on a plethora of issues. But then you also have senators like John Fetterman on the Democratic side, who has already said he's a hard no on any type of Iran war powers resolution related to President Trump and has strongly supported the operation so far. Now, you have to keep in mind on the House side, too, that margin is a majority of 1 for the Republicans right now. So any Republican or any Democrat that's going to break with their party on this vote could sway this thing and be the big determination of whether or not it's going to pass or not.
Now, presidents from both parties have conducted military operations without formal congressional approval. I read some of the history there as I was bringing you in. How does this situation compare to actions taken by past presidents? And is Congress now facing a moment to reassert its authority?
Well, like you just mentioned there, this is not the first strike since World War II that a president has authorized, and not the first strike since the war on terror that a president has authorized either. You know, President Obama issued multiple strikes. President Trump has done it, whether it be Syria or Venezuela. There certainly has been military action that's been taken without a formal declaration of war by Congress. And as you pointed out, the last time Congress formally declared war was back in the 1940s for World War II. So it's been a long time. Now, there have been resolutions that have been passed out of both the House and the Senate related to the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. And the one thing I think that people are kind of pointing to with this one is the length. Yes, you have seen President Obama, President Trump, utilized military action without congressional approval in the past, but this operation is scheduled, according to President Trump, to go on for possibly over a month. So does Congress have to step in at some point if it's going to be a potential war at that length?
Now, Ryan, we have been seeing since Saturday lawmakers from both sides of the aisle as they were reacting, posting to social media. We've been hearing from, as I said, both sides of the aisle. This is just one of those posts. This is from Senator Schiff. With U.S. casualties already reported and the president warning there could be more. We heard from President Trump earlier today at the White House. How are members of Congress weighing the political risks of opposing or supporting the operation, especially as this could evolve into a weeks-long air and naval campaign? Once again, President Trump saying this morning, Ryan, this could go on 4 to 5 weeks, maybe longer.
Yeah, so far, you're seeing Republicans who are strongly supporting this. One of note would be you have Don Bacon, the moderate Republican congressman who's been critical of President Trump on issues like Ukraine, put out a statement and numerous statements saying that he has been in support of this operation in Iran. You've seen John Fetterman, the Democrat from Pennsylvania, have a very excited reaction and strongly supporting what President Trump has done so far when it comes to this operation in Iran. And of course, you have Iranian groups, groups that represent Iranian citizens who've been very ecstatic and celebrating President Trump and thanking him for taking on this operation. But you do run the risk, too, on President Trump's side of having some pushback from Republicans. Thomas Massie, no surprise there. He's been a fierce critic of President Trump's foreign policy. He's criticized this so far. Former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone who used to be a Trump loyalist, has been criticizing this extensively. And then, of course, you have a number of Democrats who've criticized it as well. And I think there is a question, too, about is this going to be a problem with President Trump's base? Because President Trump ran as a pretty anti-war president, a peace through strength president. And there are those questioning whether or not this is truly peace through strength or an act of war.
Now, Ryan, before I let you go, of note here, we are still in a partial government shutdown, right? Is that going to affect anything when it comes to this vote?
Well, Republicans have already cited the situation in Iran as a desperate need to reopen the government when it comes to the Department of Homeland Security, because the Department of Homeland Security is mainly there to prevent a terror attack. Agencies like TSA are funded under the Department of Homeland Security, and many of these crews are already working with very limited resources because that agency has gone without funding for several weeks now. So Republicans are certainly using or citing this situation going on in Iran as a reason to bring up a vote as soon as possible to reopen DHS. And we are expecting a vote in the House this week at some point on DHS funding to get that agency back up and running.
And we'll keep an eye on Capitol Hill. Our very own Ryan Schmelz, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Christy.
And we are going to step away for a commercial break here on Live Now from Fox. Much more news to come. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.